Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for your patience as we got ready today. We're starting a little late, but that's okay. We're here. My name is Patrick Dunn, and I am the Executive Director of the New Haven Pride Center. And I'd like to thank you for joining us for the first event of our World AIDS Day observation that is running through today through December 3rd. If you'd like more information about that program, you can visit newhavenpridecenter.org/World AIDS Day. And we have a lot of exciting programming as part of this year's World AIDS Day observation. That includes the world premiere performance of Night Sweats, which will be tomorrow evening at 7:30. All of our programming, as always, is free, so I hope you will plan to join us. As I said, I'm going to be moderating the conversation today with three phenomenal experts on our history and direct experience living with HIV and or working with individuals who live with HIV from the early years of the 80s through today. I'm really excited to have these folks join us. They're really people who I look up to as someone who does organizing now and kind of the new age, so to speak. But really all of these folks created so many paths for me to be able to now do the work that I do and for the Pride Center to do the work that we do. So I'm going to stop talking, but I do want to say if you have any questions or comments throughout the conversation, please feel free to share them on Facebook or on our YouTube. I do get to see them backstage, so I will pop them up on the screen and make sure if there's a question I ask it of our amazing experts and guests today. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first person who is the amazing Shawn Lang. Hi, Shawn.
Hey, everybody. Welcome.
Shawn, if you could just give everybody watching just a brief who you are, what you do, and yeah, give some more information about how you are here today, so to speak.
So I'm Shawn Lang, and I work with an organization called ACT, formerly known as AIDS Connecticut. And I've pretty much been with the organization in its many forms since 1991, but have been an AIDS activist since about 1986 or so. And I'll talk more about that in a little bit when we get into stuff. So I'm really happy and proud to be here and really proud to share the panel with the two other panelists. So thank you, Patrick.
Oh, I'm muted. Thank you. And now I'm going to bring Larry and Karina Danvers up.
Hello, everybody. My name is Karina Danvers. I used to be the former director of the AIDS Education and Training Center at Yale University. I've been in advocacy of HIV since the late 80s and working officially in the field since the 1992. So, hey, Shawn, we're kind of in the same era, and this is my husband, Larry.
Hello.
And we've been together throughout my history living with HIV.
Thank you both for being here. And finally, we can't have a conversation about HIV and AIDS in Connecticut without having Reverend Alex Garbera join the panel.
Hi, everybody. It's Alex Garbera. I'm co-chair for the New Haven Mayor's Task Force on AIDS, and I've been living with HIV for about 40 years.
Welcome.
Pretty amazing.
Well, I'm going to get us started and just say, one of the things I was talking to Shawn before the program began was my knowledge of the history of HIV and AIDS and my understanding of kind of the 80s and the early 90s really comes from a very urban, primarily San Francisco perspective. Obviously, Connecticut is not San Francisco. And so I thought my first question was going to be for those of us that weren't around or not old enough to understand what was going on, what was Connecticut like in that period? Because I imagine it's very different from the history that we see when we see it included in things like film and pop culture.
Well, I can talk about, I was living and working in Middletown in the mid 80s to the early 90s. And I had a good friend who came out to me as being HIV positive. And there was another man who talked to his therapist at the health center where I worked, who was HIV positive. And they were like, there's no services for people with HIV in Middletown. We have to go to Hartford or New Haven, and that's not where we live. So we did what all people do in Middletown. We went to O'Rourke's Diner and had a conversation about what AIDS services could look like in Middletown. And so they said, well, we should have a support group and set up a buddy network. And again, this is before there was any state or federal funding. This is before, fax machines weren't, everywhere. People didn't have desktop computers, before cell phones. So we created the AIDS Buddy Network, and as a collaboration between Community Health Center, what was then the Middlesex County chapter of the Coalition for Lesbian, Gay, Civil Rights, in which I was also very active, and First Congregational Church, where Sally Baumer was an associate pastor. Excuse me. So we basically developed our own training for volunteers, and you had to pound the pavement back then. So we created flyers, we put them up all over the place. And I'm sure the phone number on the flyer was my office number at the health center, although I have no evidence of that. And then we started meeting, we started training people, recruiting buddies. And then one of the guys who's positive, he started the support group. And then we started pairing folks living with HIV with buddies. And back then, people were even more isolated than they are now. So the buddies, they could determine what their relationship was. So you could go to the movies, take somebody shopping. God knows we visited more than enough people in the hospital. Provide transportation to appointments. So it could kind of be whatever you wanted it to be. And then, so that was around 86, 87-ish. And from there, that group transformed over time into what's now known as the Oasis Center in Middletown, where they have, full services for people living with HIV and AIDS. So it's a different time, and I'm sure Alex and Karina can talk about this too, but I remember going to visit friends in the hospital and having to mask up and put a gown on and take all these precautions, which were completely unnecessary, obviously. And, again, there was no medication out, and I think Karina can talk about the buyers clubs that began back in the day. No medications, and we went to way too many memorial services back then. I have a picture in my apartment, and it's I think 5 or 6 guys, and they're naked, but they're all tucked. And my son said to me one day, "Mama, can you just move that? It's in the hallway. Can you just move that picture?" And I was like, "No." He goes, "Well, some of my friends are uncomfortable with it." I said, "Well, you have to explain to them that these are people that I know and love, and that 2 of them are gone and have died of AIDS. And so for me, it's a remembrance and a celebration of them."
So I really can't speak to the very early days in Connecticut because I'm a Long Island boy. In 1980, I was in graduate school studying psychology. I had these weird fevers spiking up to 105, weird rashes, went to doctors. They had no idea what was going on. I went to an STD clinic on Long Island, and they told me I should go to New York City where homosexuals go. And there were vague rumors of something happening on places like Fire Island in the city, but being in the middle of Long Island, there was no internet, right? No email, no smartphones. So like whatever, then as HIV will, it'll bloom and then it'll subside and you'll be infectious for a while and not know it. So it wasn't until I moved to Connecticut in like 1984 and tested positive in 86. And by then my immune system was pretty low, all right? And that's pretty sick. And we still didn't have internet email. Like Shawn said, we did have buyers clubs, and we had like weird journals like positive health news, how to restore your immune system. We did everything. We also did like Chinese herbs, healing HIV with Chinese medicine, and Chinese herbal therapies for the immune disorders. Because we had no information, we had no resources. There was only AZT, which was very toxic, and people were definitely afraid of it. And
ineffective.
I had friends who had to get daily transfusions, weekly transfusions. So there's so much non-information and so much fear and ignorance, and hospitals throwing out bodies into the dumpster in body bags because they didn't want to deal with it.
Remember, funeral directors didn't want to deal with people who died of HIV.
Yeah, anybody, dentists. I have dental records. When I told my dentist I was HIV positive, I figured it'd be a good thing so he could take precautions. And he gave me my dental records and asked me to leave. So much fear in Connecticut. And I was good friends with Father John Gatzek of KC 101, who did Take a Stand at Father John. And we did the first radio show on HIV/AIDS. And then I did not know my status, but I was in a closed studio with somebody with AIDS who was in his 30s, wearing Depends. And I was like freaked out just being in the studio. Even I was freaked out because we didn't know how it transmitted, what it was about. And then I went to the first AIDS clinic in New Haven, which actually they didn't have a separate clinic. They shoved us with the gerontology clinic for old people. So there I was next to this very old gentleman breathing in his oxygen, and I was breathing in aerosolized pentamidine, which they thought would prevent PCP pneumonia. So this old guy is like looking at me like, what are you doing here? You know, this is, and now I am that old person.
Aren't we all?
So for
Karina, any thoughts?
For New Haven was, gosh, I remember I lived in West Haven, and my ex-husband, who died of AIDS, got shingles. He was 22. And the doctor had like no idea why he had shingles. Then this is like 1985, 86 maybe. And so he got shingles, and you know, then he got over the shingles, and nobody said anything about it. And then he had an abscess in one of his teeth, and I remember the dentist taking care of it, and I remember no gloves. The dentist wore no gloves. Tons of blood from this abscess he had. My husband, you know, we didn't know he was HIV positive. I mean, there wasn't even a test. I mean, when I met him, there was no HIV test. We met in 84. The HIV test didn't come until 85, and quote unquote, we were a heterosexual couple. So it's like testing was for those people. You know what I mean? Needless to say, you know, we were those people. And then in 89, I remember APNH putting out flyers. Yes, because that's how flyers in you know, the light posts. That's how people knew about stuff. I mean, you know, it wasn't like you just put something out and poof, you know, people show. But I remember going to the first, by then I knew I was HIV positive, going to the first class. People wanted to learn about HIV. They were scared. I mean, there was standing room only. There was like no food, no air conditioning, nothing in this tiny little room on Chapel Street, right above Claire's. The EPNH used to have their offices there. And I'm telling you, we were there from like 5 until 10 o'clock at night, people asking questions, just desperate, trying to like figure out like how they could tell like who had it and who didn't, because people didn't want to be around them, you know. And here I was, like part of them. And basically, I got a really clear message at that class that it was like, oh, hell no, you're not telling a living soul ever, because look how these people are reacting to it. And I remember the two guys who ran the class, this wonderful couple. They were just the sweetest. And I wish I could, you know, go back and find them. For some reason, I felt, obviously, I felt confident enough to trust him, and I told him I was HIV positive, and I remember him saying, oh my God, that is so great. Oh, look at you, you're young, you look healthy, you're a heterosexual woman, you would do so much for this. And I was like, I was like, wow. And he's like, oh my God, you have no idea what you could do because of your circumstances, you know? And it was, you know, in those days, it was just, you know, I mean, I'll never forget the phone number at APNH, 203-624-0947. That was their hotline. That's who you call at night when you were scared to death, literally to death, because in those days it was death. And AZ2E, you know, I started taking it when it was 1,200 milligrams a day, not 2,400 like some other folks have taken it. And even 1,200 was just like, I mean, basically it was either you took AZT and you stayed in bed all day, or you didn't take AZT and you took your chances, basically, you know. But there was this one more thing. There was this theater on Broadway. It was a private little theater, movie house. Do you remember that, Alex? The Broadway theater?
Mm.
Yeah. And so the owner was like, you know, really always very, very great, anything that had to do with community. And he showed the movie Long-Term Companion. I think that was the name of it. And the place was packed. I mean, standing room only. And I remember going with my two best friends, Christopher and Charlotte, who are still my best friends to this day. I was positive, they were negative. And we remember, and just bawling our eyes out because at the time, you know, that's what was happening. And now my friend Christopher is positive too. And so out of the three of us, two of us are positive, which is kind of shocking when I think about, you know, going to see that movie on Broadway, the three of us, you know, and they were there for me. But, you know, now Chris is also positive, you know. We took very different paths with HIV. I completely immersed myself in the AIDS world, and he completely emerged in quote unquote regular life, nothing to do with HIV. So very interesting.
I remember being in college and we had a gay student group. This was in the very early 80s. And we used to get the newspaper, the Gay Community News, delivered. And I have such a distinct memory of sitting in our little office. It was literally like a closet of an office, reading the GCN and reading the first reports of this disease that was killing young gay men, you know, in the hubs like New York, San Francisco, LA. And, you know, again, we had virtually no information. And at the time, you know, nobody we knew had gotten sick. And as Karina said, the test didn't even come out till 85. But we did a reunion. We've had a couple reunions. We did like a 30-year reunion a number of years ago. And, you know, I do genealogy, so I know how to do detective work and trying to track down people. But come to find out, at least two of the guys who had been part of the group had died. And there's another one who's positive and living his life and doing really well. But, you know, those kinds of things, you know, really hit home.
How was, and Shawn, I'm going to start with you on this question because I think of you as someone who is inundated in this. Not that Alex and Karina, you weren't, because I know you were also, but because I've heard Shawn talk about this, I'm going to start there. You know, how was Connecticut on the actual response? Because I've heard versions where Connecticut responded well. I've heard versions where people are very critical of how Connecticut's early response was. And I know that, and partially from Alex, that Connecticut was very affected by HIV very quickly because of our proximity to New York. So places like in Fairfield County, which, you know, ironically, we're seeing a similar problem with COVID, where it started in Fairfield County and spread to the state. How do you, from your end, how do you feel Connecticut did? Because I've heard so many versions.
Well, I think it depends where you lived and who was active at the time, you know, who got involved. So, for example, we didn't get any state funding until, I want to say, 92.
Yep.
I could be wrong on that.
Yeah, no, that's correct.
And then the Ryan White Care Act basically passed right around the same time. And then the Housing Opportunities for Persons with AIDS passed around the same time as well. So I think once we got to see some funding, people were able to put services back together in really different ways. And as I mentioned earlier, before there was any funding, it was all volunteer. People just gave of their time and got involved. And I think for probably most of us, it was very personal. We knew people living with HIV and AIDS who needed and wanted support. So we, kind of threw ourselves into it. I didn't start working for an AIDS organization until 91, but obviously had been involved prior to. So really seen things evolve over time. And I think one of the interesting things now is that a lot of organizations don't identify as an HIV/AIDS organization. They branched out into like the housing organizations, to broader supportive housing, to broader, substance use, mental health, behavioral health kind of stuff. And even our organization, I mean, our primary services are people with HIV and AIDS, but, we just merged with another organization. So our name is just ACT, Advancing Connecticut Together. And we didn't get rid of the AIDS part because, we felt that it would stigmatize us or our services, but it's just the way that things have sort of evolved. But I know that some organizations, changed their names because they felt like people wouldn't want to come to an AIDS service program or an AIDS housing program. So you'll be hard pressed to find many organizations around the state now that have HIV or AIDS in their titles, which to me is kind of sad. But I think having that helps destigmatize and sort of put it out there. Like, we had a saying some years ago at our AIDS Awareness Day, HIV is everywhere. It's still with us. And, I was emailing with some folks today who are going to be on a similar panel to this and said, folks have to remember that, even though we've seen new infections plateau, we have to count our successes. And if I look at the syringe services program, those have really completely reversed the tide of new HIV infections among people who inject drugs. But we still have many people living with HIV and AIDS who are still with us and still need and deserve support, services, housing, prevention work, medications, etc.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I remember when, APNH, AIDS Project New Haven, or formerly known as that, it never had a sign. So you knew where it was, but only if you knew where it was. Same with Hispanos Unidos, same with AIDS Interfaith, and which are no longer with us also.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I remember when Chris Cole became director, he's like, hell no, we're going to put a sign and we're going to be proud and we're going to do it. And oh my gosh, I mean, the backlash he got was incredible. How could you do this to people? People are going to, and it was eventually it became a source of pride when you walked in, and the back door basically stopped being used. So you're right, Shawn. It's like it was a huge, he came from San Francisco, so he took a huge chance by being sort of the outsider and making such a bold statement at the time, which was considered such a bold statement, Now he's made another bold statement, like what you just said, Shawn, that is AIDS Project New Haven, although it's kept APNH is no longer that name, it no longer has the AIDS. And the same thing with the Mid-Fairfield AIDS Project. They kept its letters, but it's no longer, that. And
Or AIDS Project Greater Danbury.
Yeah, now it's APEC. So it's really interesting. And part of it is that, I think the directors, I mean, we all know them very well and respect them. And I think also, too, they had to look for other funding because HIV funding, it's there was a surge in the 90s, when finally the Ryan White Act got passed, which, people don't realize that there wasn't always a Ryan White Act, and or a KDAP. There was no such thing as, getting medications for free. So, I mean, it's hard to believe that we lived in a world where the whole AIDS industry was 100% volunteer at one point. I mean, I remember Mickey Cavanaugh, and I'm sure you guys remember that name. She was worked in the New Haven school systems, and she had two speakers, Michael Caine and me, and we used to literally take a day off from work and do 8 classes, one after another. My husband sometimes would come with me and go to all the high schools throughout the city. And she fought tooth and nail to get us in there. I mean, it wasn't an easy road. And kids.
Michael was actually one of the guys who helped found the Middlesex County AIDS Buddy Network back in the day.
Yes, he did. I mean, and he was just gorgeous looking man. He still is. And he would come to the schools, and kids were like, you don't look like those people, skinny and whatever. And, I was cute and young. So,
you still are.
And I used to try to wear, hot clothes. So the kids thought, ooh, she's a hottie and she's got AIDS. You know what I mean? But no, seriously. I mean, in all seriousness, I remember, doing that on purpose, to be quite honest. So the kids, especially when I would talk to seniors, they would see this like young, good-looking person, and they would think, oh, okay, like, wow, I didn't realize like people that look like you could actually have this. And then when my husband and I started doing things together, and I know Alex and I sometimes we differ in this sometimes. I know you're wondering what, but it's like, I totally believe that nowadays consumers need to be compensated for their time and stuff like that. But at the same time, there was a time where we did so much. I mean, we basically did it as a full-time job to advocate whenever they needed somebody to speak. They needed a face. They needed to parade us in front of anybody just to get the point across. You know what I mean? People don't realize the amount of hours and times and my husband would take time off from work. Like, we used to run conferences. We couldn't afford an IT person or all this other. My husband would take the day off from work and he would do the IT stuff. Somebody else would make, tuna sandwiches, I mean, I don't know. In a way, I miss those days when there was a community.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I don't miss them because part of the community was going to funerals every weekend. So, and we literally went to funerals every weekend. I mean, there was never a time, but for years, that there wasn't a weekend where there was not a funeral happening, Yeah.
Or visiting people in hospitals. This brings back so many memories. I think what's now ACT Connecticut started out as AIDS Ministries. Same thing with the Guardian Health Association. We used to be the People with AIDS Coalition, and I'm wearing my People with AIDS Coalition t-shirt. Fight AIDS, not people with AIDS. But I remember very early on, this had to be 87, 88, a young Black male came into the group and was totally freaked out, totally just could not deal with the word AIDS because there's so much stigma and homophobia at that time. So that's one of the things why the Guardian Health became Guardian Health, just take AIDS out of it and focus on health and healing. We used to be a little buyers club. We did the Chinese herbs things and vitamins. And then in 1995, protease inhibitors came, and they were the silver bullet that were going to cure AIDS. But actually, that didn't happen. But it was a significant part of treating AIDS. When we started, we did not even know how the immune system worked. Doctors had no clue. Mm-hmm. And because of AIDS, we now have all the medicines and technology we have to fight cancer and other autoimmune diseases because of AIDS research. But it was very scary, and taking the name out was very hard, and I got a lot of flack back in the day for getting rid of AIDS, but it meant more to be able to be more open to people, that they can come for information and not be afraid of it, and to focus on health and healing rather than focus on the disease itself.
I want to say, too, really have to give props to people living with HIV and AIDS, especially in the early days when folks like Larry Kramer and Peter Staley et al. Started ACT UP, the AIDS Coalition Unleash Power. I always encourage folks with HIV who haven't been immersed in this the way that we have to watch How to Survive a Plague or what's the other one, United in Anger, to understand what it was like in the early days and what some of us lived through and how we owe a huge gratitude to people with HIV who put their lives on the line so that other people might live. There's a great quote by Vito Russo, which I'm not going to remember off the top of my head, but about, someday this plague will be over and, we'll have to remember and retell these stories about how we went from there to where we are now. But, I sometimes talk with folks, like our clients and stuff, and really encourage them to watch one of those documentaries and say to them, you wouldn't be alive today if it wasn't for ACT UP. And so we have to tell that history because it gets lost. And, I see, even in my own organization, it's young people who don't really have a connection with HIV and AIDS. And I'm like, you got to watch, How to Survive a Plague or United in Anger to understand where we were to know where we are now.
Yeah, I remember one time being asked, ABC came to interview Dr. Friedland, who was the director of the AIDS program at Yale, and they wanted to interview somebody with AIDS. So he asked me to do it. And, my husband and I, we had to go through like, okay, this is going to be ABC News. It's going to be national. He had 2 little kids. Would his ex-wife see it? Would the kids be taken away from us? I did the interview with ABC. It was going to be on the national news. And I remember my husband kept the kids busy downstairs during the news because the kids knew that Larry really liked to watch ABC News. He still does. And so he had to keep the kids busy downstairs and the TV off to make sure that they wouldn't watch to see if I was going to come on. My segment was not aired. Someone else was aired. But for a half hour, we were hiding upstairs. I was hiding upstairs in the bedroom, wondering if my face was going to come on ABC. And we took a huge chance at the time, and now it seems like if ABC, and I'm not saying for everybody, I mean, people are still scared. I'm not taking that away, but I just remember my husband and I thinking it was the right thing to do, to put a face to HIV, but we also knew that my husband's kids at the time might have even taken away. Maybe his visitation rights would have been taken away. What would the kids do? And the heartwarming thing about the kids is that eventually, when my son was 16, I told him, because he was coming to live with us, my stepson, but he's my son, and he was like, yeah, okay, okay, what's for dinner? And it was like, okay, we've been worrying about you all this time. And then one time my stepdaughter Catherine asked me to come and speak to her high school in Florida, and I was like, about HIV, and then I said to her, well, if I do, I need to tell you, I'm HIV positive. She's like, yeah, I know since 8th grade, I Google you. And it was like, and it was just, in moments like that, you realize we have moved. The needle has moved. When the young generation that hopefully is listening to us now, we have moved. But I think what we have to understand is that history, when you get diagnosed with HIV, even in 2020, history the diagnosis does come with a lot of painful history. And it's really important to know it. If you're positive or if you're negative, just to know where we've been and how much people like us. I mean, we were just regular people. You know what I mean? There's nothing special about us. We just decided to take the fight, and you can take the fight on any topic, not necessarily HIV. And we can make a difference. I feel like I've made a difference.
Oh, absolutely.
and there's so many people who have made a difference in the state of Connecticut, like the owner of the movie theater on Broadway, which is no longer there. Kinko's on Broadway, which is no longer there, used to give us free flyers to put the word out, you know. People who, hundreds of people who made cookies and tuna fish sandwiches for, you know, for talks. It's and the doctors and the nurses that Mary Walensky, I don't know if anybody remembers that, but from Nathan Smith Clinic, and you know, Nathan Smith Clinic, which is the main HIV clinic at Union Hospital, used to have a room with the tanks for pentamidine. In other words, to prevent PCP in the clinic. That room doesn't exist anymore. You know,
People like June Holmes and Al Novick.
June Holmes, of course, yes. And our own Alex right here, who still hasn't given up on the advocacy,
Yep.
or Linda Wilson. I mean, they're just the names and the unknown names. You know, the unknown names and the people who have died.
Exactly.
The medication clubs.
Yeah, Sarah Ann Powers, who founded the New Haven People AIDS Coalition, also on the board director of the National AIDS People with AIDS Coalition, which no longer exists, or Robert Noel, who started the People with AIDS Coalition in New Haven. So going back to the question, yeah, so Shawn's right on. It depends where you lived and who you had for a doctor. I was fortunate enough to have Dr. Gary Blick in the early days, and we did some very strange things like passive immunotherapy, where they take T cells from a healthy person with HIV and give them to somebody like me with no T cells. Now that's a popular treatment for COVID, and it's working for COVID. It didn't work so well for HIV, although I'm still here, so who says if it didn't work or not? So having a doctor that really listened to you and was thinking about holistic made a difference. So the doctor and Gary Blick is still there. Gary Blick is still there. HIV advocates.
So I want to ask a question. I think that that, you know, when I think of the stories I've heard about, you know, what I would say is the early years of HIV, again being big so much in the era of, you know, San Francisco, and from that perspective, you know, I think of the community and the way the community rallied as being what really created space for so many people to live and to thrive, regardless of what was going on with their status. And I think of moments like, you know, the bars in San Francisco and the drag community creating fundraisers to pay for people's funerals. I think of, you know, the lesbian and LGBTQ women who ran most of the clinics that were volunteer because, you know, the nurses and so on wouldn't do that. And the way the LGBTQ women like surfaced and really were there for the rest of the community. That was that, you know, how, you know, in that time period, Connecticut was much more rural than it is now. And I think arguably could still be considered rural in the grand scheme of urban development. How was it different, that sense of community? Because obviously you don't necessarily have a queerborhood where everybody was living. You don't necessarily have like 10 bars on one block anywhere. So how was that sense of community found? I know you talked a little bit, Shawn, about the buddy system, but what were kind of the ways the community came together?
Like the pub in New Haven, the pub, what used to be called the pub, which is the Anchor. There's another bar. Those were places where you know, people knew that it was a safe place to go, a safe place to have conversation. But there were always places for the gay community. So if you were a heterosexual person, you were always welcome. But the heterosexual community really wasn't in New Haven. It wasn't the driving force. It was the gay. It was the white gay men and lesbians really, who took care of their brothers. Who people don't realize that because thankfully the lesbian community was not as affected as the gay men at the time. And basically, as a heterosexual person, you would say, "Hi, can I come in?" And people would say, "Of course, you can come in." You know, But and New Haven was like the Anchor, the pub, the theater, Kinko's, believe it or not, and places like that people congregated, and things got done. And then once in a while you have this seeds, these flowers, like Mickey Cavanaugh, like I was saying, in the school system, and then June Holmes, who was in the system, in the health system, and Alex, who was doing the consumer, and then the buyers clubs, for example, our main buyers club was in Boston, for example. So you hear like, oh, if you take 1,000 milligrams of this, and then the buyers club in Boston would get it, and then we would get it, and then we would distribute it. And I mean, it was, I don't know how we communicated, to be quite honest. I can't remember how we communicated. But you did, and you knew where to go and who to go to and where it was safe and where it wasn't,
The other thing that happened in Hartford was there was a movie theater called Cinema City, and they played Paris is Burning. And so I think it was a fundraiser for the Hartford Gay and Lesbian Health Collective. So we were all there. And I remember standing in the back, and Rick Stolson, also known as Mucha Mucha, was there. And Mucha was like, we should do this in Hartford. So they started doing drag balls in Hartford, and there were a number of different houses that cropped up, that House of Nations, House of Pleasure, House of Trailer Park Trash. I was the father of the House of Q, House of Bushfire, and they started organizing drag balls. Each of the houses took responsibility for organizing the next drag ball, and they were really quite the extravaganzas. But they were fundraisers for HIV and AIDS organizations. And there were places like, and again, I'm more Hartford oriented, like St. Patrick, St. Anthony, who had an AIDS ministry early on, before any other churches, Catholic or otherwise, were doing anything. And I agree with Karina. I mean, the bars were hubs for us. And in Hartford, also, we had the Reader's Feast, which was a bookstore and cafe. It was lesbian owned. That was another hub for us. I mean, when we did any organizing stuff, we would drop flyers off there, pick flyers up. They had, one phone, and I was there all the time. And, they'd come and get me in the cafe, and they'd say, Shawn, John Bonelli's on the phone for you. Don't stay on too long because we only have one line. And so we'd chat for a minute. But I also remember, like, with John, going to the different gay bars, which there were a lot of in Hartford, too, back in the day, and handing out condoms and giving people information about where to get tested and why that's important. And, just kind of being out there, or, standing on the sidewalk outside of Hartford High School, trying to get them to have condoms in the schools. And we would do it like on a Valentine's Day. So we would stand there and hand out condoms to the students as they were going into school. So again, like Karina says, how the hell did we communicate? We just did. We did what we had to do, what needed to be.
And not to be a bitch, but when people talk about outreach now, and I'm like, oh, girl, you have no idea what outreach means. Oh, honey, it's like outreach is like, yeah, you send an email. Yeah, no, that's not gonna do it. You know what I mean? Outreach was like you bought like a card table, or you took it from somewhere, or you had a couple of milk crates, and you set your ass somewhere in Dixwell or Whately, and you just took the shit people gave you, and you just gave out the condoms, and the people who took them, you knew you needed them, and you went to the shooting galleries. And I'll never forget something, I used to, because I was cheap, I would just park in the street where I worked at Yale. It was near Columbus, and in a bed part, quote unquote, of New Haven. And people say, aren't you afraid to leave your car there? I'm like, hell no, this is the safest place for me, because people know me, you know what I mean? And they know me as the AIDS lady who has free condoms and talks smack about penises and blowjobs and all that other stuff, And it's like, so when people say, oh, I do outreach, I'm like, no, 9 to 5 outreach, sitting on your on your desk. I'm sorry, no. And that's the kind of outreach you talked about, you said to the women and the young men out there, it's like, okay, tell me what you're doing. Tell me how I can help you. You know what I mean? Okay, so you just do blowjobs? Okay, all right, fine. You just do this? Okay, fine. You know, whatever it is that you do, this is how we can help you. You know what I mean? Does it give you more money if you use a condom? Okay, I can't talk you out of it, but here they are just in case. You know what I mean? Or learn tricks how to put a condom on without the guy knowing, put it in your mouth. I mean, if anybody has ever done that with a lubricated condom, it's disgusting. But we taught those kind of things, and we felt safe, and I knew my streets. I don't know my streets anymore. You know what I mean? I started working in the office behind the desk too, maybe it got a little more dangerous. I don't know. Or maybe I became more afraid. I don't know. But
it reminds me of Donna Sherbrooke, who used to go out doing HIV and STD testing and Shayest, and I was an HIV counselor then. But in the early days of community, we had support groups. Like we had the New Haven Healing Circle, which was founded by Peter Kimmerlin. We had lots of other groups going on, just a lot of support, and we had leadership from people like in DPH, like Beth Weinstein, who was at every Ryan meeting, every HIV meeting.
Oh, yes.
We had governors like Jody Rell. I asked Jody Rell for $2 million to expand KDAP, and she said, sure, put it in a budget. But for some reason, DSS gave it back. I don't know. DSS was a very strange beast at that time. And so we had leadership at the very top levels that cared. And I think that helped create a container for that community to happen. And that leadership is what's lacking now, too.
Well, because I think, and I have to say for myself, I should say, I became part of the system. And when you're in the system, you also have to you can't piss everybody off. Even though I know, Shawn, you would, kind of disagree with me a little bit, because that's what ACTIV did. They pissed people off and they got shit done. You know what I mean? But once you're in the system, I know, I knew I was good being in the system because I knew I could make changes. But you also, you watch your P's and Q's too.
But one of the things I loved about Beth Weinstein is, she worked at DPH. She was the head of the AIDS Bureau at DPH back in the day. And, she was the kind of person who would, on the down low, feed information to us. We could also stand outside of DPH and protest whatever was going on, but it wasn't personal. It was, business. We were doing this as advocates and activists, and she never took it personally. So we were always able to maintain a very strong relationship with her. And we went through, as Alex said, many governors, many commissioners at DPH over the years, but some people were constants, and we were able to continue to work with them.
And remember the community advisory boards? I mean,
the
consumer advisory boards.
Carol Ross for KDAP. She wanted to make sure that community advocates were on the table and having their voices heard, and they were very transparent. They gave complete financial reports, and consumers really had an equal say in all the business of the KDAP in the first in conception.
Yeah,
that was consumer engagement.
Yeah. So I just wonder my husband's take on it. I mean, he's HIV negative, and he's been sort of living with this alongside me. I'm just curious about what's your memory of all of that?
My memory is definitely of a time when there wasn't hope. That's probably one of the strongest memories I have of the early days when you really didn't. Here, right now, it's pretty hard to put that into perspective of when there wasn't medications available, when there wasn't anything you could do. I mean, I felt so powerless being Karina's partner. I couldn't do anything. I mean, there was nowhere to help her go to get medical attention. She was getting the best medical attention she could, which was pretty much just supportive care of trying to keep healthy and trying to treat opportunistic infections if they occurred. And the wonders we went through when various medications became available. But the other thing I keep in mind is, we got married and we had a relationship that meant that I had access to her at any time if she should get terribly ill. But I remember other people who were gay partners. The world was different back then. I mean, you couldn't get married. You couldn't be a spouse to someone who was gay, and therefore didn't have the same rights with that person as what you did. And I saw that difference between us. It was a different world back then. And I think a lot of the changes that have occurred in the meantime have been the result of a lot of the activism that came out of the AIDS movement, of having rights for people that weren't there before. And I think that just the world's a different place for a lot of what happened during the AIDS epidemic, of getting people recognized, getting rights, and not having everyone so marginalized. Although, unfortunately, it seems we've somewhat gone back to that a bit lately. But hopefully there's brighter times coming.
So this is incredible, and I could listen to you all talk for another 4 days. But I do want to recognize that we are getting close to the last 5 minutes. And this is making me think we need to have a part 2 of this conversation. So I think I'm going to have to engage all of you in a part 2 once we get into 2021. But I guess what I want to end as my kind of last question as we end is, as folks who were there, who witnessed history that so many of us in the community may not be able to understand or fully grasp, what's the one thing that you'd like to leave people like me who want to know more, want to understand more, and want to do more than we might be doing now? What's that kind of, what would be your message to the new generation that's coming up that someday will have to carry on and doesn't have the personal experience of the 1980s and 90s?
I think there's 3 things. I really encourage people to watch How to Survive a Plague or United in Anger, because that'll give you a really great sense of that history. 2, if you're a parent, talk to your kids about drugs, sex, and rock and roll. That's the best prevention message you could give. And 3, look for volunteer opportunities, which obviously is different now in the time of COVID, but with your local HIV and AIDS organizations.
I would say care about HIV again. HIV as a virus hasn't changed. It's still a very deadly virus unless you have access to the medications and supportive services that make taking those medications possible, like housing, nutrition, medical care, dealing with the side effects. These 1 pill a days, they're great, 1 pill a day, but it's still very toxic medication, which interferes with cellular metabolism. It's changing the way the DNA is working. So they're very strong medications, and they have to be taken every day. So it takes a lot of supportive services. So care about AIDS. If you're a parent, care that your children still can catch AIDS. 1 out of 2 Black MSMs are at risk for HIV. This is not acceptable. Please care about HIV.
And for me, I would say you can make a difference. You really can. And there's nothing special about the 4 of us. And for example, Patrick, when I first met you, you were a one-man show. And look at you now. I mean, seriously. And that's only been in the last few years. It takes passion. It takes dedication. It takes a few hours. I truly believe, and I've seen it in my own life, that no matter what the topic is, and obviously we're passionate about HIV, you can make a difference. You might not see it. You might not get a plaque for it. Nobody might know that you did it, but you did it. And it's worth doing. It really is at the end of the day, it's worth doing. I think it's the greatest gift we can give back to humanity and to ourselves. So thanks for this time. This was awesome.
This was
awesome.
Oh my gosh, you all are incredible. And like I said at the intro, I'm honored to share this space with you all. I'm honored to be able to advocate alongside all of you, and hopefully someday follow at least slightly in your footsteps, if not follow in your footsteps, because you are people that I remember being a young little queerling 18-year-old at University of Hartford and going to my first AIDS walk at Hartford, and Shawn, I don't, you were there then, but I used to go to the gala for the Oscars every year. I think the first time I went, I was 21.
Oh my God.
And I went, it was in these weird, bizarre spaces, and it was, it's just incredible. And I'm kind of speechless to be sharing this space with all of you, and to be kicking off World AIDS Day observation with all of you. It's really special for me, and I feel like we need to figure out a way of recording this history, because there's a lot of it here, and there's a lot of, just the stories over the last hour have been truly, truly incredible. I will say that as we go into this week, it is kind of, in my own way, I'm experiencing of what I can imagine the 80s might have been like, the 90s might have been like because of COVID. And just, even if it's only 5% of what it was like, it's terrifying right now. And I really appreciate all of you and all of your time today, and always, because all of you I get to work with through the work at the center. So thank you all for being here today. Thank you to all of you who have been watching. As I said, this is kicking off World AIDS Day observation, which runs through this Thursday. Please join us for any and all of the programs we have going on. The kind of centerpiece being the world premiere of Night Sweats, which is an incredible commission by the New Haven Pride Center, the New Haven Mayor's Task Force on AIDS, and the Guardian Health Association, utilizing HIV positive artists to create an incredible piece of work that you are not going to want to miss. It's tomorrow night at 7:30. You can get all that information about that and all the other programs at newhavenpridecenter.org/World AIDS Day. Again, thank you everybody for being here. Thank you to our panelists, and I look forward to seeing you over the next few days.
Great to see